Welcome to the second video on my channel, and today we're going to talk about the recent developments in Pokrovsk. What is the latest information we're getting from Pokrovsk, and when is this town likely to fall to the Russians? So if you're new to this channel, kindly hit the subscribe button below, enable the notification bell, and as well support the channel through the super like button, donations, etc. The latest information that we have from Pokrovsk, the map is below here, is that the Russians were able to gain more ground on the northern flank of Pokrovsk, and literally in between Rudinsky, and there's another town known as Bliske just above Rudinsky. Now the Russians have yet to literally cut the highway that is going from Rudinsky to Gopilia into Pokrovsk through Minurad directly, but they're very close, and chances are that highway right now is completely unusable because the Russians are more likely able to cover the whole highway, observe it using FPV drones. Now on the southern part of Pokrovsk, the latest information you're having is that there are still Russian forces inside Pokrovsk as we speak, and there are people have come up with different theories to explain this situation. Because if you check the map, you'll see clearly that the Russians are operating somewhere in the center of Pokrovsk, and that means these Russians are either DRG units, as they say, or as well they have some sort of bridge that is connecting them to the rest of the Russian forces. Now, in my opinion, I think the map looks something like this, and the Russians are right now have some sort of a strip of land that they're able to capture that is linking them with the Russian forces inside Pokrovsk. Yeah, because if you are to be very honest, though it is possible that the Russians have been can operate over there without having direct connections, but if you are to be very honest, it is almost a week heading to 2 weeks. And the Ukrainians literally announced that they had literally eliminated the Russian forces in Pokrovsk, but you're still getting videos of Russian forces in the city. So it's very possible the map looks something like this, and I believe with time we might get more geolocations in between that confirm that the Russian forces literally have a connection from their main occupied territories into Pokrovsk itself. The situation that is actually happening with Rodinsky and Miglorat is very interesting, and in my own thinking, I think what the Russians are trying to do right now is literally cut off Miglorat from Pokrovsk. And one of the objectives they can be able to do that is by literally having forces disrupt the transport routes in Pokrovsk that lead into Mignorat. Now, you should remember that one thing you need to remember is that at the beginning of this Pokrovsk offensive, you realize that Ukrainians had a total of around 5 highways that were literally open to them that they were using to supply Pokrovsk and supply their forces. However, as time has gone by, the Russians were able to cut off approximately 2-3 more, and right now they only have 2 main highways, one that is going through Dobropilia, Rodinsky, getting into Pokrovsk, and there is also another highway that is going through the other side. You forgot the name, but it's just going through the other side, and it is quite open. Now, highways are very important in this war because here's the thing: wars are very resource intensive, and what you need is always some sort of tarmac paved road that is open that can allow you to supply your forces very fast with tanks, ammunition, remove forces that have been injured, etc., and all those sorts of things. Now, by the Russians literally cutting off some of these highways, it means that, for example, if as we speak right now, it means that the Ukrainians now have to use only one specific highway to supply their forces, remove the injured, and do very many things. And this also means that the Russians can now focus on that specific highway and even make it more difficult or more costly for Ukrainians to literally supply themselves. Now, one of the things that the Russians can easily do to literally make the situation even more difficult for the Ukrainians is by the Russians literally taking over Rodinsky. Yeah. Now, once the Russians are able to take over Rodinsky or literally cut off that highway completely, take over Rodinsky, the Bliske town over there, then it means Mignorat will be completely doomed because the Ukrainians will only have one single route that they can be able to supply their forces in Mignorat, and that is through Pokrovsk. Now, if you already have forces in the Russian forces operating directly into one of the main highways into Pokrovsk, then it means Mignorat will be completely sealed. Now, that is not to mean that the Ukrainian forces in Mignorat or Pokrovsk are completely doomed. They can always use other small dirty roads in between because there is a very huge gap. If you check the map, there is a huge gap from the top between Rodinsky to the next highway, so they can always find a way to to do supplies in between. But the problem is these are dirt roads, and the longer they stay on the road, the longer the ammunition and others stay on the road, it increases likelihood that the Russians will be targeting them, and as well it slows everything down. So at the end of the day, as it is, the situation is very difficult for the Ukrainians. Now, as well, when it comes to Rodinsky and Blinsky, these cities are going to be very interesting for the Russians to capture. They need a lot of more forces, because here's the thing. As we speak right now, Ukrainians are operating from Rodinsky and Blinsky, and they're likely using them as a staging post, specifically for FPV drones to monitor what the Russians are doing on their northern flank. Yeah, and this means that for the Russian forces to be extremely secure from this northern flank, they definitely need to take over Rodinsky and Blinsky. Now, taking over Rodinsky might be easy to some extent. Those people have been saying that it will be difficult, but in my opinion, it might be easy, because one of the main supply routes to Rodinsky is the highway. And that highway is completely unusable right now. And as well, the other supply route is from completely through Pokrovsk. Now, if at all the Russian forces are able to hold and literally even split Pokrovsk into some sort of two regions, or literally take over the middle section, separate the road, etc., then it means the Russian forces, the Ukrainian forces operating in Rodinsky, first of all, will have a very difficult time. There's more likely they'll pull out of Rodinsky and fall back into Vinnytsia, and once they do that, then it becomes even more difficult for them, because the Russians will now be able to even do the cauldron even much bigger and even put more pressure on them. How long will the Russians take to literally take over Pokrovsk? And the answer to that question is completely open-minded. Or open, because the thing is, if the Russians are able to take over Rodinsky very fast and literally put pressure and start targeting the remaining highway, they'll be able to create a very huge cauldron that is more likely to force the Ukrainians to now start thinking of pulling out of Pokrovsk. Yeah, but if the Ukrainians literally put up tough resistance from Rodinsky, then it means the Russians will only have to either try this other flank, the lower flank, or they'll try to storm the city directly. Now, something tells me that if the Russians were well prepared, they could literally storm the city directly, and they might even get better results rather than focusing on the flanks. But the downside of such a strategy is that it is going to be very costly. But who knows? Things are very interesting in matters raw. And with the information that the Ukrainians are completely suffering from staff shortages, it is very likely that if they did something, they might literally surprise the Ukrainians and literally take over Pokrovsk. Even if it is like 50% or 60%, then they focus on the other things. On the other sides of the front line, we have the section, the Torsk section. The Russians have been able to get into almost 60% of the town. There is a small cauldron forming in between, and I believe the Russians will be able to handle that quite easily. So Torsk somehow can be considered as a fallen city, just a matter of time. Yeah. As well, there is very minimal activity happening on the northern section of the front line, on the Belgorod region, on the Vovchansk region. There is a lot of few fights here and there, and I believe these are meant to keep the Ukrainian forces operating actively over there and deny them the opportunity to reinforce the sections in the Pokrovsk region. So thank you guys for watching this video. If at all you found it very interesting, kindly support the channel through the super chat button, through donations, through PayPal, etc. It will help the channel grow. Thank you guys for watching. Let's meet in the next video.